So today we're going to be talking about automation. And what is automation? Automation is basically creating a system that operates automatically without needing input from people. Basically, a system that can run by itself without needing a human there. As time has gone on, we've created systems that were more and more automated. It is not exactly a thing where you have complete automation or you have complete human input. It's a spectrum. So maybe in earlier versions of automation, you only needed somebody to do something every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or maybe you only need somebody to start it and stop it. But newer automation can run longer without needing people to be involved. And exactly how long has automation been happening? So automation goes all the way back to about 300 BC. BC means like 300 years before zero. And at that point in early automation, they were trying to basically create clocks. And some of the earliest clocks were water clocks. In the more modern time for automation, that dates back to the 1700s in Western Europe and the US. During this period of time, they call it the Industrial Revolution. And during the Industrial Revolution, both Western Europe and the US started automating a lot more processes, a lot more tasks, a lot more things. In 1712, one of the major things that helped kick off the Industrial Revolution is the first steam engine was created. And this was able to produce continuous power and able to use that continuous power to then drive other machines. And it was that original steam engine that basically first started all the things that happened in the Industrial Revolution. Another key thing in 1794, the first cotton gin was created. That was an automated system. Let's talk about that specifically as a way to sort of learn about how automation affects industries. So before I can talk about the cotton gin, let's quickly talk about cotton. So cotton is a plant. That's what it looks like right there. And cotton has, the cotton plant, the white stuff is very fluffy, but it has lots of seeds in it. And originally, in order to get out those seeds, you'd have to have somebody pick out by hand all the little tiny seeds inside the cotton plant. And when people were first doing this, before automation, one person could probably remove the seeds to about 1 pound of cotton per day. So that's working all day, could at the end have 1 pound of cotton without seeds. This was obviously very, very labor intensive. It required a lot of labor or people, a lot of work. So it wasn't very profitable to harvest cotton. This changed in 1794. This person invented what is known as the cotton gin, and that picture on the right is about what it looks like. So cotton gin is basically just a machine that separates the seeds from cotton. This very first cotton gin that was produced in 1794 was small and hand cranked. Hand crank basically meant somebody would use their hand and their arm to actually turn the machine, and in turning that machine, the machine would separate the seeds from the cotton. And even though this first cotton gin was small, it had to be powered by a person turning the crank. One person plus one machine could remove the seeds from about 50 pounds of cotton per day. And comparing that to before the cotton gin, just adding this one small hand crank machine produced 50 times more cotton per day from the work of one person. So obviously, if it reduces the amount of people needed by such a large extent, it made it so it needed 98% less people working on it. It meant that it became a lot more profitable to plant and to produce cotton. This happened, the 1974 cotton gin, that happened here in the United States. And so by the middle of the 1800s, the US was actually producing about 75% of the whole world's cotton, because that machine made it so much less expensive to produce it here in the US and process it. At that point, in the middle of the 1800s, about 60% of all US exports was cotton, because we had such an advantage over every other country at that point. The cotton in the US was mainly grown in the South, and this particular, even after you process this and have a seedless piece of cotton, that's still very much raw material. And while the US exported a lot of that raw material out of the US, since this is where the cotton was, textile mills in the US had a very big advantage. And so having the cotton produced here in the US in the South created a lot of textile mills here in New England. Textile mills is just places where you take the raw material, like processed cotton, and then turn it into fabric. So these textile mills would get cotton from the South and turn it into fabric. That fabric would then be turned into clothes. So not only did so this one machine not only made the U.S. The producer of 75% of the whole world's cotton, it then spawned other industries in other parts of the U.S. And this is a general trend that happens with automation. When you automate one process, number one, it becomes cheaper, and whichever company is able to automate that particular task, because they're able to do it now cheaper than their competitors, they have an advantage over them, and they will become more successful than their competitors that do not automate. Another thing that happens is sometimes automation will have secondary effects on other industries. When one thing becomes automated, it can produce other industries related to that. So we touched on this a little bit already, but why exactly is automation happening? And automation has been happening for a very long time now. So why does this happen? The main reason is that in businesses or industries in general, one of your largest costs is the cost of workers or employees. And machines are able, if a machine is able to do that work that the worker would be doing, while the machine, when you first buy the machine, is more expensive than hiring an employee, in the long term, that ends up being cheaper. So machines are very expensive when you first buy it. So in the very short term, the machine is more expensive, or automating is very expensive in the short term. But in the longer term, because of both the machine being a lot of times more efficient, and the machine you don't necessarily have to pay a daily wage to, in the long term, the machine will be more profitable or cheaper than workers in the long term. So where is automation happening? Well, let's look at sort of the different stages of automation. So in the early to mid stages of automation, automation mainly happened in manufacturing and production. So the making of things. For example, machines were used to make cloth, that's fabric, or like pieces of car. Machines were used to process crops or food. Example is machine is used to grind wheat to make flour, or grind corn to make cornmeal or ethanol. Machines can do things such as verbs like mixing, stirring, separating. So in the earliest stages of automation, when it usually comes to a country, automation is first used in manufacturing and production. And that's because, actually, let me get to why it is that, why is it that these are the fields that automation usually starts in? And it's because the things that are easiest to automate are tasks that are repetitive and require little decision making. So those are basically the easiest tasks to originally automate. And in manufacturing, before automation came around, there were lots and lots of tasks that people just did over and over and over and over and over again. So because there's lots of repetitive, simple tasks in manufacturing, it was a very easy field to first introduce automation. A lot of these types of jobs, you might hear this term thrown around, blue collar jobs or blue collar fields. This is just, blue collar refers to basically physical labor. So jobs that require a lot of physical labor, or lots of use of your muscles in doing things, such as manufacturing, construction, installing things, cleaning. These are considered blue collar jobs. Cooking would fall into this. So a lot of blue collar jobs are the ones that are originally automated, or first automated when automation starts going into a field. And like I said, this is why they automate those tasks. In sort of the middle step after they've automate the simple, after they automate these tasks right here, the repetitive, require very little thinking tasks, the next sort of things they move into in automation tends to be many step or complex tasks. As long as they can take that many step or complex task and break it into simpler tasks, then they're able to automate it. As long as those each individual simple task is also something they can automate. And once again, this isn't an all or nothing. It might be that a complex task, let's say, for example, flying an airplane. So flying an airplane is a very complex task and it's a very many step task. The driving around the airplane strip, or what's called taxiing the airplane before you take off. Then you have the actual takeoff. Then you have all the things in the middle of flying. The flying normally, the having to go up into a higher elevation, the staying at that elevation, the coming down from that elevation, the landing, and the taxiing or driving on the airport runway after you land. So it's a very complex or many step task, but what they have done is they will break that very complex task into much more smaller, simpler tasks. And they try to automate each of those individual tasks. The ones that are hardest to automate, they'll automate last, but it won't be that there won't be any automation. Example, when the hardest part about flying a plane is the taking off and landing. So those tasks right now are still 100% done by a human. But the easiest part of flying is the cruising, where you stay at the same elevation and just keep on going. And at that point, the pilot can actually just hit a button that says autopilot, and the plane basically flies itself at that same altitude. They've even created automated systems that can do a lot more complex flying. For example, they have automated systems that will stop a fighter jet from crashing into the ground if the pilot loses control or passes out. So after they've automated the simple repetitive tasks that require little decision making, the next thing they go on to is tasks that they can break down into simple tasks. Finally, here are the list of the things that are hardest to automate. That first one is actually the hardest. Tasks that require you to interact with people require a lot of these very complicated small things that you end up doing, and those little small things you do, changes in how you say something, speed of your talking, whether you smile at what point in the conversation, where do you put a pause in the conversation, things like that where you have to interact with people. Those are one of the hardest things to automate. Another thing that's really hard to automate is novel or new tasks. So here I'm talking about tasks that are constantly changing so that they stay novel and they stay new. Of all of these right here, this one is probably the one that they've made the biggest headway in, moving around many different environments. Part of the reason that cleaning services are almost never automated for say a building or an office is because in order to clean that office or building, you have to move around very varied or a lot of different environments. And currently, machines still have a very hard time doing that. And finally, anything that requires very complex decision making, where you have to weigh a lot of different things, these two tend to pair together a lot. Part of the reason complex decision making is complex is because it ends up a lot of times involving new or novel things. If the complex decision making always had the exact same types of inputs, types of factors going in, and was not novel, they'd have a lot more success automating these complex decisions by breaking them up into smaller decisions that they could do. So easy, mid, and hard tasks to automate. Okay, so, and it's not only large industries that have done automation. Normal people like you and me, we've actually automated stuff in our own life. And some examples of things you've automated, maybe even in the last day. One, alarm clocks. The pictures you see here, this used to be a job called knock-uppers. And these people would have a clock and they would basically wake people up at a certain time. People would pay them a little bit of money, and these people would go around town and they would knock on your window to wake you up in the morning to get to work. Another very common task we've automated is dishwashing. On the left, that is a restaurant dishwasher requiring a little bit of people input, the first initial rinse, but then they put it into that yellow tray you see there, and the machine does the actual washing. And on the right, you see a house dishwasher. Both of these have basically made it a lot more efficient. Both of these have made it a lot more efficient or less costly to do that particular task. Instead of paying somebody every day to wake you up, now we just pay the money that you first do at the very beginning when you buy the machine. And then after that, that alarm clock wakes you up every single day. All right, so that's a very brief introduction to automation.